Hello there.
Hey, what's up, you guys? This is April with the For Richer or Horror podcast, and today will be part 3 of the 4-part I Dared My Best Friend to Ruin My Life series. So let's just get right in. Part 5. The police took Isaac out in a body bag. Mrs. Watson left with the body, still sobbing uncontrollably. I was told that I couldn't go into the apartment until they were completely done with the crime scene. No, they didn't know when that would be. They suggested a hotel room, which I laughed at. I asked if I could grab a blanket and a pillow for my room so I could sleep in my car. They reluctantly brought it to me, and I gagged when I grabbed them. They smelled like death. Hernandez offered to give me a motel room or let me stay at his place, or even begged me to call a friend and stay with them. I refused all 3. I walked to my car and ignored Hernandez. I was still too mad about everything and devastated that Clark had left. Besides, we couldn't do surveillance on the car while I slept in it. I marched all the way to my car and slammed the door hard. I decided I didn't feel safe parking near my house to sleep, so I went to a Walmart parking lot for the night. It was as if fate had finally begun to root for me. I was walking down the Walmart entrance from the parking lot to buy some food. When I was only a few cars away, an armored truck pulled up. The ones that carry the money over to the bank. You know what I mean. And who do you think stepped out of the truck? David fucking King. I staggered to my left and got behind a car, using the black tinted windows to observe. He was laughing with his partner, who got out of the passenger side. I was too far away to hear what they were saying, but I definitely didn't recognize the partner as anyone I knew. It was obviously paranoia, but I wonder if he could be the one who had made Katie speak into the phone. The 2 of them walked into Walmart, and I took note of the company that owned the truck. And then I had an idea. My first real idea on how I could fight back now that I knew where David was right this second. I sprinted back to my car. A little while later, I pulled up to Mrs. K's house. I got out and looked around, making sure David hadn't somehow beaten me here or followed me. I had to hurry. Who knew how much longer a shift would last? I knocked on the door, and Mrs. K opened it. "Hello, Xander," she said cheerfully. "Hi, Mrs. K. Can I come in?" 5 minutes later, I was rifling through David's room. Had to hurry. Had to find something useful and fast. I told Mrs. K that a year ago I'd let David borrow a video game and just now remembered and wanted to pick it up. She had happily let me in and go into his room to find it. I had booted up his ancient laptop, but it was taking forever to load. Why the hell hadn't he bought a new laptop with the money he stole? That would make good evidence. I glanced at every paper I saw, hoping for something. Written plans, a checklist, a receipt, anything. Every paper I found was normal from what I could see. His room was a disaster, which worked in my favor. He may have dropped something incriminating and not known about it. I stuffed every flash drive I could into my pockets as I went. He had 4 of them laying around. They might have incriminating evidence on them. The laptop finally booted and I instantly tried to log in. No luck. Password protected. I should have known, considering how tech-savvy he'd been in hacking my accounts. In fact, all the incriminating data was probably on the laptop. He wouldn't bother printing anything out. That gave me an idea. I picked up the laptop and flipped it over. A toolbox laid under the table, and I snatched a screwdriver from it. Using the screwdriver, I went to work disassembling the laptop. When I'd finished, I'd held his hard drive in my hand. "I will ruin you, David King," I whispered. As I reassembled the laptop, something caught my eye under the bed. A box. Furrowing my eyebrows, I pulled it up towards me. It was a shoebox with dust covering in the top. A few spots were less dusty when someone had handled the lid. I opened it slowly and peered inside. It contained a 1/4-inch thick stack of pages, all bound together by a binder clip. The box was too small to let the pad lay flat, so it curled in the box. The pages were old and worn. They'd clearly been handled frequently. I lifted it out and noticed that it looked like research paper. The front page had a title in the middle and an author at the bottom. Psychological Evaluation for David Edward King. The bottom of the page had the name of the institute and psychologist that had done the study as well as the year. I did the math, and the evaluation must have been done when he was 16. Jackpot. I stuffed it under my shirt as best as I could to hide its square form. The laptop was set back in its place as if it had never been moved. David would know something was wrong eventually, but not until he booted it up. I gave a last look around and wondered if there was anything else I should do. With no decent ideas, I left David's house. Mrs. K gave me a brownie on my way out. On the drive back to the Walmart, I tried to come up with a plan. I couldn't take this to the police because it was illegally obtained evidence and wouldn't be admissible in court. I knew that from a bunch of crime shows. I had to get at the evidence myself and somehow get it into the police's hands legally. When I parked at the Walmart, it still wasn't that late. I walked inside carrying the flash drives and the psychological evaluation with me. I used the demo computers to look at the contents of the flash drives. Looking back now, I'm amazed they let USB sticks work on the demo machines. The first flash drive had an old school paper on it, nothing useful there. The second and third drives were bootable drives that could boot Linux. I didn't expect everyone to understand what that means, it's not important. It was on the fourth flash drive that I had my first breakthrough of evidence. It contained a single text file that had been edited the day before. As I read through it, I realized that it was a conversation. With my current understanding, the flash drive was how David and his kidnapping partner had been communicating. David would write a message and hide the flash drive in a predetermined place. Then, the kidnapper would go pick it up and read the message. The process would reverse when the kidnapper had a message to pass along. A lot of you will probably say, why wouldn't they just use encrypted emails? That's so much faster and safer. If they had used any kind of network to communicate, some internet service provider or some cell phone provider like Comcast would have a log entry of the messages being exchanged, even if the data was encrypted. Encrypted data is never 100% secure. If you dedicate enough processing power, you can crack an encryption. It may take thousands of years in some cases, but it can still be cracked. With our current advances in computing power, that could change to be even faster. David and his partner had reduced their risk of being caught by limiting who had access to the information. If you send an email to me via Reddit, I'm not the only one that gets the message. It passes through several servers and routers who all make note that a message passed through at a specific time. It leaves a trail. Unless you can erase the logs of those servers, you leave a trail no matter how you send your data. There was certainly risks that someone could find the flash drive, plug it in, and find all of this data like I had, but that could be reduced by choosing decent hiding places. If you plan to pass messages this way, don't leave it laying around your room. Especially, don't leave it unencrypted. I still don't know why it wasn't encrypted. The text file would have a line, then skip a line, and add another when the next response was. I didn't have the flash drive or a copy of the conversation anymore, so I'll have to paraphrase as accurately as I can. Payment received? Yes. Last half of payment comes when this is all over. How long? Depends on him. Good? Good, no suspicion. A quiet grab. Was she harmed? She fought, a couple of bruises, otherwise fine. There were some extra lines in between, marking the start of a new conversation. Any new information? A kidnapping report has been filed with the police. Change locations every 2 days as previously discussed. Are you well supplied? We had enough in the truck to keep moving and stay operational. Good. With any luck, this will be over soon once he makes an irreversible mistake. I shuddered as I closed the text file. That was damning evidence. I checked who the owner of the file was. It was blank. Well, that would have been too convenient. I googled the kind of cable I would need to hook the hard drive up to a computer and bought a SATA to USB cable. I was thankful that the demo computers were in an aisle out of the view of the employees in the tech center. To people who didn't know technology, I'm convinced I look like a hacker. Let me give you another lesson on technology, since I seem to be giving so many in this series. When you boot your computer, it asks for a password if you've set one. Without the password, you can't access the hard drive unless you do some hacked up workaround. In some cases, however, you can unplug the hard drive and plug it into another computer instead. The new computer will treat it like a regular external hard drive and Viola. You have access. Unfortunately, David had encrypted his entire hard drive, so it was useless to me at the moment until I had some spare time to either guess the password or find someone who could crack it. Going to the summer supply section of the store, I took a seat and pulled out the psychological evaluation and looked at the cover page again. Psychological evaluation for David Edward King. I hope you realize that I've removed the institution, author, and date for privacy's sake. I spent an hour skimming the pages, using the table of contents to navigate. I constantly had to look up lengthy words on my phone, but I was beginning to understand what went on in David's sick little mind. I won't give you an entire rundown of his whole life, but the report contained transcripted interviews with his parents about incidents, a psychologist's observation while holding David in confinement, and a general list of events that had occurred in David's life that may have traumatized him. These are the ones I remember. David set fire to animals constantly and poked them with various objects. When a snake lunged and bit him once in his backyard, his mother came out to find him whipping the limp body against a tree, guts spraying everywhere. His only explanation was, "It tried to hurt me." He was found designing traps for rabbits and other animals that were expertly hidden and designed. He claimed to have never looked at the wilderness guide to make them. His mother later found entire notebooks containing designs for traps. The traps were aimed at getting both animals and humans. His father died when he was 12, which affected him greatly. He became quiet and reserved for years. First day of high school, however, he changed overnight and became charismatic, energetic, and clever. In middle school, one of his teachers had been interviewed after an incident. She had noticed that 3 boys had begun picking on David, but he quietly took whatever they gave him. One day, she came to class, and all 3 boys sat ramrod straight and stared straight ahead. They didn't dare look at David, and David was smirking, trying to hide it. Finally, let me try to summarize what the psychologist wrote about David. David seems to have a constant need to harm other living things and cause suffering. Once, in my office, I found him stomping his feet on the floor. I asked what he was doing, and he admitted that he was trying to crush anything microscopic that could be on my floor. I seriously fear that he will not be able to remain in society without serious medication and therapy. I had no idea that David had any of these problems or experiences. He and I had met when we were both 17. He'd been exactly as the report described, charismatic, energetic, and clever. I felt blind for not seeing any red flags, but I knew he had hidden them well intentionally. The psychologist made another entry a month later. David seems to have performed a complete 180 in his mood, actions, and demeanor. He has been polite and kind every time he has come in, and is very capable of being fully functional. That sentence struck me as odd. Months of statements about David's instability, and suddenly this comes out? I googled the professor's name. He died in a car crash the same year as the publication date on this evaluation. Son of a bitch. I reread the very last entry. I recognized the words for what they were. A coerced recommendation to re-enter society. I could feel the psychologist's words scream through the page. Good God, he's going to kill me. No wonder David was so prepared. No wonder he was always ahead of me. No wonder his expression had spread such absolute fear through me that night he chased Clark and I. He was insane. He designed traps. He knew what made people and animals tick. He enjoyed inflicting pain on them, and not just that, but watching them suffer. David was absolutely insane. Insane, but functional. That's what made him dangerous. I hunkered down in my seat and brought up a Word document on my phone where I could take notes. Then I started Googling. You know what I'm talking about. You're facing a problem, so you start searching for anything online that could help you fix your problem. The internet was a wonderful tool for me at this moment. Without it, I'd be dead months ago. I was kicked out of the Walmart for loitering, but I continued my research in my car. I turned the car on every once in a while to drive around and charge my battery. That night, I learned about hacking, phones, Android, surveillance, police procedure, legal procedure, and all kinds of subjects that related to my situation. I took dutiful notes and outlined areas for further research and learning. During my research, I found a list of apps that could be used for hacking someone's phone. I checked my installed applications, and can you guess what I found buried in my phone? One of those apps. David fucking King had been eavesdropping and tracking me through my phone. Instead of deleting the app, however, I kept it. It could be useful in the future. I also researched the company David apparently worked for. It was a larger company that served several states, providing both long and short distance transport of valuable goods. This was good information. If his job was to handle valuable goods, then it could be an easy way to get him fired or even charged if some of it disappeared from his truck. His truck was long gone by then, so I had no current opportunity. During all hours of night, Hernandez would call me. So would Katie's mom. I ignored them both. That was a big mistake, I'll later learn. When the sun rose, I didn't feel tired. I felt empowered. Finally, I knew more about my situation and enough to be useful. I knew how to get those hard drives to the police legally, but I needed Clark and Hernandez's help. I never got to use that plan, though. Reality caught up with me. David moved too quickly. I was driving to my apartment to see if I could brush my teeth, take a shower at least, before work that day, when my phone buzzed. It was Hernandez. I answered it reluctantly, prepared to get an earful for ignoring him all night. "Xander, where are you?" he asked. "Driving to my apartment," I replied. "You need to come down to the police station," he said slowly. "Right away." "Why? What's up?" I asked. "It's bad," he said with a cringe. Confused, I hung up and turned right, heading towards the police station. I walked into the police station lobby to find Hernandez waiting for me. "Did Isaac's body turn up anything?" I asked, looking at his worried expression. "They're still analyzing it," he said. Then he took a deep breath. "Some new development has come up." I gave him a questioning look and then felt cold metal click around my right wrist. I reacted, but the two cops had flanked me, pulled my arms together. The metal clinked around my other wrist, handcuffing me. "What the hell?" I shouted. The policemen each gripped one of my arms. "Xander, I know you're upset about everything that's going on," Hernandez said quietly. "But what you did went way too far." "What the fuck are you talking about?" Hernandez held up a bag containing a phone. He used the touch screen through the bag and navigated to the phone's voicemail. The voicemail was jolty and sounded like whoever had the phone was running. Wind struck the mic, making it hard to hear in places, but the voice was unmistakable. It was mine. "Fuck you, jackass. You ruined my credit, stole my money, hacked my accounts, and stole my shit. I'm gonna kill you. You think I need a motivation to hurt you? I'm gonna kill you, you son of a bitch. You'll burn in hell. You'll burn." My heart shuddered to a halt. I had said those things. I had literally said those things. The night David chased us and pinned me to the table, I'd said every word. The bastard had been recording the whole thing and now had edited it to a threatening voicemail. "David King's home burned down last night," he said slowly, watching me, gauging me. David and his mother were still inside. Firefighters found David alive and were able to pull him out, but his mother was already dead. That voicemail was sent to his phone from yours at around the time firefighters estimated the fire started. I lost my breath. My eyes watered. The world closed in. I couldn't speak, couldn't defend myself, couldn't explain. "Xander Jones, you're under arrest." Part 6. I laid in an empty cell, trying to catch a small nap since I'd been up all night. My mind was racing, though. It made it hard to sleep. I kept rehearsing what I was going to say when Hernandez finally came to get me. They'd emptied my pockets into evidence bags, took my fingerprints, and one cop was heading out to search my car. I wasn't dumb. I knew that evidence would point the police to 3 conclusions. 1, that I'd been in David's home recently. After all, the data on those flash drives had been updated just the day before, even the ones that didn't have the kidnapping transcribed on them. 2, the flash drive containing messages between David and his partner might lead them to believe I had kidnapped Katie. And 3, that I'd stole David's hard drive as well as confidential medical information. I kept trying to play out the conversation with Hernandez. I hope it would pan out the same way it was running in my mind. I was woken up by a slight knock on the bars. My eyes peeked up to see a man in a suit standing that accompanied an officer. "Hello, sorry to disturb you," he said sheepishly. "I'm Terry Jason, your public defender. May we talk?" Yes, of course, I said, sitting up. The officer entered and cuffed me. We were both led to the interrogation room where I'd met Hernandez for the first time. I trust you will shut off the cameras, he said to the officer. The cop nodded, removed my handcuffs, and closed the door. You can call me Terry, he said, reaching out to shake my hand. We sat down opposite each other with the table between us. I've heard a little bit about your case and a brief overview from the chief, he said, pulling folders from a briefcase. It's long, I admitted. So I hear, he said. I'm gonna have to apologize in advance. It's likely that you'll have to repeat your story many times during these proceedings. To prevent this as much as possible, you and I are going to sit down and write your version of events down. That way, you can fall back on your statements and ensure that what you say is consistent and accurate. Does that sound good to you? He said. It made sense, so I nodded. First, I have a contract here for you to sign that says you agree to let me represent you in criminal proceedings. He pushed a paper and pen across the table to me. I skimmed it and signed at the bottom. He pulled it back. Would you like me to call you Xander or Mr. Jones? He asked with an easy smile. Xander's fine, I replied. Okay, Xander, let's start writing. Terry sat patiently with me while I wrote every detail I could think of. I began with my dare conversation with David and followed all the way up to this point. It started out as a page with scrambled memories and words to jog my memory. Then it slowly formed into a statement that Terry helped me edit into a cohesive, fact-based statement. When you're asked about your memories or an event, refer them to this document, he said. We worked for an hour before he spoke again. I have to get to another appointment, but I've asked that you be allowed to continue working in your cell. I've scheduled a meeting with the prosecutor and Detective Hernandez tomorrow at noon. Do you think you can have it complete by then? Yes, I think so, I said. And I did. I spent the rest of my day writing that statement. I slept sporadically, but I was desperate to complete it before noon the next day. So much had happened, and I had so much to say. I was quite proud of the results. In fact, I was more proud of the statement than this one. That statement had a lot more fresh memories. This one feels a little scatterbrained. My statement was concise and to the point, but maybe it's for the best that this one is the one that I posted. The next day at noon, I was back in the interrogation room. Terry sat to my left. Hernandez stood against the wall facing me with his arms crossed. I couldn't read his expression. On the other side of the table sat an older man who had introduced himself as Chief Gunderson, Hernandez's boss. Beside him stood a tall, lanky man with slicked back hair. He held his hands behind his back, watching me intently. The tape recorder between us was running. I've been brought up to date on the cases you're involved in, Chief Gunderson said in a gruff voice. I'm interested to hear everything from your perspective considering the recent developments. You arrested me just to hear my side of the story, I snipped. No, I arrested you because you're suspected of burning down Anne King's house and thereby killing her, Chief Gunderson said. Hernandez tells me that you might have felt justified in doing so considering all the accusations that you've levied against Mr. King. So I'd like to hear what has happened from the beginning and hear your side of the events. Who's he? I asked, pointing at the lanky man. I'm the prosecutor, Adam Luderman, he answered. Oh, so you'll be the one trying to put me in prison, I quipped. Terry put a warning hand on my leg. I'll be trying to establish the truth about what happened, he corrected, glaring down at me. My client has prepared a statement that he intends to wholly rely on, Terry said, pushing copies of the 17 handwritten pages across the table. The chief and prosecutor took one. Hernandez stepped forward and grabbed one too. He instantly started reading from his spot in the corner. I tried to catch his eye, but he didn't look at me. I trust we can begin the process of discovery today, Terry asked. I'll need copies of everything as well as copies of the official indictment. I tuned Terry out and focused on Hernandez. There was something about his demeanor that caught my attention. I couldn't tell what it was. I focused on him for the entire meeting, trying to figure out what my instinct was telling me. They talked over legal details with Terry and corroborated the process of discovery between the two parties. A couple days later, Terry was sitting with me in the interrogation room again, talking through what he'd learned from discovery. Discovery is when the two sides of a case share evidence so there's no surprises when they go to trial. Anything not brought up in discovery is not admissible in court. Before trial, though, would come an arraignment. That's when the formal charges would be laid against me and I would have to plead either guilty or not guilty. Terry was talking through discovery with me, so I'd be prepared for what they'd say during the hearing and decide whether I'd plead guilty or not guilty. Here's what I learned. After I'd been arrested, the police had searched my car and found the hard drive, flash drives, and psychiatric evaluation. And something else that was curious, a half-empty gas canister. That fucker had planted a gas can in my car at some point without me knowing. I'd been in my car all night, so either David knew he was going to burn his house down before I went to Walmart, or he planted it in the few minutes I was in the police station. I told Terry about the gas can being planted, and he wrote down some notes. The police had searched through the contents of all the flash drives and discovered the conversation between David and his partner. Except, as predicted, they accused me of writing the messages and therefore linked me to the kidnapping. The text file never specified Katie's name, but they claimed Katie's kidnapping was the most likely scenario since I knew about it and was therefore involved. Despite the evidence, however, the prosecution didn't feel like they could convince a jury without more evidence. So, Katie's kidnapping wasn't planned to be laid against me as a formal charge, but they were searching for evidence. They had also tried to open the contents of David's hard drive, but found that it was encrypted, just like I had. They had sent it off to a lab to be analyzed for whatever data could be salvaged. The medical report was classified as inadmissible because it pertained to an individual who did not consent to the dissemination of its contents. As a citizen of the United States, you get some control over who can look at your medical records. Denying its use in a courtroom is a right in certain situations, including this one. David had decided to exercise that right and deny access. As a result, the prosecutor could only charge me with possession of someone else's medical records without permission. This was a serious crime, apparently. Terry had also been informed the identity theft case was being combined into the charges against me. The credit card companies had done their own investigation and were filing criminal charges against me for fraud. Why would they do that? Because a technical investigation into the origins of the registration for the fraudulent cards found that the reporter himself, Xander Jones, had indeed filled out and completed the registration forms from his own computing device. In other words, they had traced the IP address of who had filled out the registration forms from the cards online and found that my computer had been the one to sign up, which meant they were accusing me of signing up, spending all the money, and then reporting fraud. Also a major crime. The emptying of my bank account was also pinned on me. Again, they claimed I was trying to commit fraud by filing a false claim with the bank. The police had finally got the security tapes from the convenience store where the ATM was located. There were 3 angles. One camera was above the door, one was above the register, and one was in the far corner of the store opposite the ATM. The tape showed a man in a dark hoodie walk into the store. The video was grainy, as you would expect, but despite that, a large symbol on the back of the hoodie could be recognized. The man in the hoodie walked to the ATM and pulled something from their pocket. The prosecution claimed it was a cell phone since the timestamp on the camera matched the timestamp of the login to my bank account. The hooded figure looked down at it for a few minutes before typing into the ATM, blocking the screen with their body. The money spat out, he grabbed it and walked towards the door. The camera on the opposite side of the ATM was the only one able to catch a glimpse of their face. It was grainy, but the prosecution compared it to pictures from my Facebook profile to claim that it had enough resemblance to have been me. Comparing to David's pictures, it could have been him too. I'd argued that point with the prosecutor pretty fiercely. When I was done with my outburst, the prosecutor told me that the investigators had also found a hoodie with the same logo in my apartment. Then they played their trump card. The bank had been logged into from the IP address assigned to my own cell phone during that time period. Regarding the fire, which was the main accusation against me, they had decent evidence. The gas can was one, the voicemail was another, but there was even stronger evidence. When I first arrived at Walmart, I parked near the front doors in view of the cameras hanging off the building. They clearly saw me drive away when I was heading to David's house. When I came back, though, I had parked in the back of the lot, intending to be away from other cars while I slept. The camera could barely make out my car parking in the back lot. It was too dark to tell if it was even a vehicle, the prosecutor claimed. So, realistically, I had only had my testimony to support the fact that I had been back to Walmart at around 6 p.m. I should have added that it took about 15 minutes to get to David's house from Walmart, just so you can understand the time frame. Fire crews received a call at 6:04 that David's home was on fire. They had raced over immediately and found the house burning brightly. David had been found trying to lift his mother up from the ground in her bedroom. They brought them both out, and it was discovered Mrs. K was already dead from suffocation. David had been rushed to the hospital with a few minor burns and some smoke inhalation. He had yet to explain his version of events to the police. Firefighters had filed a report stating that the fire had been started from the middle of the living room, where a puddle of gasoline had been ignited. The flames had spread throughout the house. Traces of gasoline were found in various rooms, making them believe that the suspect, me, went from room to room and slashed gasoline around, just like in the movies. They also concluded that the fire had been started sometime before it was called in because of how much damage that had already occurred by the time that they arrived. I know now that David had sent an alert on his phone that was linked to the app he had installed on my phone. When my GPS read that I was at his house, an alert would be sent to his phone as a text message. I could only guess that he jumped in his car, left work, and sped all the way home. That's why I think the time was so close. I'm telling you all of this detail so that you can see just how hopeless I felt while I sat in jail. I was there for 2 whole weeks, where it was the same accusations and evidence over and over. I really started to just give up. During the first few days, I asked Terry about how he could prove that it was David specifically who had committed these crimes. He frowned and told me I should be more concerned about being proven innocent, period, not on pinning it on another man. By the end of week 2, I was trying to just plead guilty rather than fight. The arraignment went poorly. No charges were thrown out that had been placed against me. I would list all the crimes I was being charged with, but I don't remember their exact phrases, and I know I'll get it wrong. You get the general idea that I was fucked. Bail had been set at $5,000, which essentially guaranteed I'd be stuck in jail for a while. I had already contacted my parents out of desperation, and they would try to raise money from family members and friends, but couldn't pay immediately. After 3 weeks, I was very depressed and not eating much. Terry tried to cheer me up by showing me parts of the argument he was preparing, but nothing could cheer me. I thought about Katie a lot, and Clark, and Ivan, and I missed my parents. I also missed Clark's first hearing in the graffiti case, so I had no idea how that was going, which made me feel guilty that I couldn't support him. During the time I was in jail, Hernandez only came to visit me once. It was during the 3rd week. I jumped off my bed and ran to the bars. "Hernandez," I said, "please tell me you've come to give me some good news." "No," he said. "You're being transferred to the county jail. Your trial will happen there." "Why?" He shrugged. "Just how it works," he said. "Did they find anything on Isaac?" I asked. I'd been clinging to the hope that Isaac's body would turn up evidence against David. I just wanted to nail him for that one crime, just one. I wanted it so bad that my hands would shake when I thought about it. "I'm not allowed to talk about that," he said, avoiding my eyes. "Anyway, I came to tell you that you'll be moved in 3 days. "Hernandez," I said as he turned to leave, "I thought you believed in me." "I do," he said, "until you burned David's house down. Now I'm not so sure who the psychopath really is." "I didn't do it," I shouted, but he walked away. 3 days later, as Hernandez had said, they came to move me. After dinner, I was cuffed and led out the doors to a police cruiser that would drive me to the county jail 2 hours away. The 2 officers who drove were polite to me, but instantly cranked up the radio when we got on the road. I could barely hear myself think and was starting to get frustrated. I had always hated car trips without my own music. Now I was stuck in a 2-hour ride with my hands cuffed behind my back and a radio blasting music I didn't like. We were about an hour in and I was ready to scream. I stared out the window, trying to find something interesting to watch and focus my mind on. We were on a 2-lane highway with no other cars in sight. It was getting late, so looking back, I figured people were home for the night, and that's why I was so dead. My view of a nice lake was suddenly obstructed by a big gray truck. I tried to find something else to look at, but then noticed it was getting dangerously close to our lane. I looked up at it and saw that it was an armored truck, and it had the same logo as the company David worked for. The panic was instantaneous. Something gripped my lungs and kept me from vocalizing. The truck slowly neared the side of the police cruiser before pressing against it. The police shouted. The cop who was driving slammed on his brakes, and the other cop dropped the radio he was reaching for. The cruiser didn't slow down fast enough, however, and the truck nudged it off the road. I braced for impact as we rolled down the grassy slope and slammed into a tree. My seatbelt had held me in place, but my head ached when it rammed against the driver's headrest. The two cops were unconscious, laying at awkward angles. Neither of them had had their seatbelts on. I started yanking the handcuffs, trying to reach my seatbelt to undo it. I reached the red button and pressed it. When I turned back around to wiggle out of the loose seatbelt, I saw David fucking King walking down the slope towards the car. Oh shit, oh fuck, I cursed, turning to reach for the door handle with my cuffed hands. No such luck. The door was locked from the outside to prevent prisoners from opening the doors themselves. David got closer and closer until he was right outside the car. He shot a smirk at me and opened my door. I tried to back away, but he grabbed my arm and tossed me out of the car. I fell to the dirt with a gasp. I sat up a little and saw that he turned his attention back to the police car. I saw one of the cops beginning to stir. David opened the driver's door and pulled something small from his pocket. With a quick motion, he stabbed the cop in the neck. Blood spurted out and the cop started screaming and gurgling, grabbing for his neck. I think I screamed too, but I can't remember. He closed the door and walked around the other side. I could see the other cop was moving, but I couldn't tell what he was doing. Apparently, he was reaching for his radio because David yanked it out of his hand and set it on the car's roof. And then he stabbed that cop too. Both of them were unconscious in seconds. "Don't get up," he threatened, walking towards me. I didn't bother trying. He walked over to where I sat and went behind me. I tried to face him, but he kicked me lightly. He knelt down and I felt him scratching the metal on my handcuffs. I was confused, but sat absolutely still. "Nice to see you again, Xander," he said, walking to stand in front of me. I watched him with true fear. His entire demeanor was different from the night we'd graffitied his house. He was changing. When I didn't answer, he laughed. He was twisting the small object in his gloved hands. I noticed through the blood that it was crudely crafted shiv with the length and width of a finger. "I told you I'm not going to kill you, Xander. In fact, for once, I'm trying to help you out. Sort of." "What does that mean?" I asked shakily. "Remember the night you graffitied my house?" I nodded. "I told you I'd consider giving you advice on how to succeed in our game. Well, the time has come. I'm giving you more than advice. See, you're no fun in jail. I've seen the evidence they have on you. You're going away for a long time. I don't want that. So I'm granting you a second chance to keep playing." He walked behind me again, and I felt sticky blood on my fingers and hand as he pressed the small shiv against my hand. "Now, here's how this works," he said, standing back in front of me. "I'm gonna leave this knife with your fingerprints on it in the car. They'll think you stabbed the cops and made a run for it. I'm gonna remove your handcuffs and let you make a run for it. You'll have a 30-minute head start before I call it on the radio." Oh God, he has a knife. He stabbed the driver and he's... David cut off, mimicking the call he'd make. Goosebumps ran up my spine. "I'll be sitting here and waiting. If you attempt to come back, I'll take you away in my car and we'll play a different game. Do you understand?" I nodded, too terrified to speak. "Get up," he commanded. I struggled to my feet, rolling in the dirt to get to my knees and stand. "Come here," he said, moving towards the police car. I followed. He opened the police car door and pulled his hand against the officer's neck. I flinched when he flicked blood at me. It splattered across my jail suit and face. I almost threw up. "There we go," he purred. He motioned for me to turn around, and I did. He pulled the handcuff keys off the dead cop and unlocked the cuffs. I rubbed my wrists. They were sore and marked from the car crash. I considered trying to get the shiv from him and attack, but the idea of going with him in his car to play other games terrified me. David had set a backpack next to the car and now set it in my hands. "Hernandez says hello," he said with a malicious grin. "I paid him a lot of money to get him to let me track this car. He demanded that I give you half. Of course, I'm not that generous, so here's $2,000, a change of clothes, new shoes, and a map. Nearest town is 10 miles west. Better hurry. Remember, In 30 minutes, I'm calling it in. My jaw shook as I put the backpack on and started heading towards the setting sun. The forest looked dark and menacing. I looked back when I was partway through the trees, and there he was. He leaned against the car, drinking from the coffee container one of the cops had brought with. Shuddering, in shock, and absolutely terrified, I walked on into the woods. And that is part 3. Wow. Isn't that so fucked up? Like, seriously, that's so fucked up. Ugh. David fucking King. Such a problem child. Jesus Christ. Ugh. I mean, if he had been instituted, and hadn't ended up killing that psychologist, Xander would have never had this problem. But alas, David is a psychopath. So that's going to wrap up this week's episode. I hope you guys liked it. Stay tuned next week where we will wrap up this series. Bye.